Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have a 30-minute presentation prepared. We're going to remind you of who we are. We're going to talk a little bit about our new mission and our strategic plan, and about the 2019 grant making process. This presentation will be available on our website sometime next week. So as you're working on your applications for this grant round, if you need to come back to any of this information, it'll be there and accessible to you. If you have any questions for us, we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Those of you on Zoom can just type them in and we'll take a look and answer whatever questions you have at the end. Sound good? Good. I am Tamara Winfrey Harris. I am the Vice President of Community Leadership and Effective Philanthropy here at CICF. And so that's a whole lot of words. That means my department includes scholarships, community impact, effective philanthropy, which is what you might commonly call donor services. That includes our major funds, and the team of folks that you probably work most closely with, and that is community leadership. And I am going to have the community leadership team introduce themselves to you now, but I will say we are missing two of our team members. That is Alicia Collins, Director of Community Leadership, who handles mostly criminal justice reform, as well as neighborhood empowerment and placemaking, and Josette Robinson, who is Community Leadership Officer.
My name is Haley Logan, and I am the Community Leadership and Effective Philanthropy Coordinator. I am your contact for any technical difficulties during the application period.
Hi, this is Andrew Black. I'm the Director of Community Leadership. My portfolio includes the economic mobility and family stabilization pieces of the current strategic plan.
Diane Schissel, and I'm a Senior Community Leadership Officer. My portfolio includes homelessness, affordable housing, community development, economic development, and historic preservation.
Hi, Clayton Defer, Senior Community Leadership Officer. My portfolio areas include arts and culture, the environment, animal welfare, health, wellness and disability, food access and nutrition, and other.
Thank you. So just to remind you a little bit about us, we are an $811 million foundation, and we are more than a century old. In 1916, the Indianapolis Foundation was formed, and about 22 years ago, the Indianapolis Foundation partnered with what was then Legacy Fund, is now Hamilton County Community Foundation, to create Central Indiana Community Foundation. So when you think of us, think of those three affiliates, CICF, the Indianapolis Foundation, and Hamilton County Community Foundation, as well as our family of funds, which includes the Women's Fund and Senior Fund and the new African American Legacy Fund, and more than 400 donor advised funds, including major funds like Glick, Simon, and Ephraimson. We do three things. One of them you are probably most familiar with, and that is we award grants to effective nonprofit organizations. However, we also provide leadership to make Central Indiana a better place to live in a more equitable community. So if you were with us on April 11th, when we announced our strategic plan, that work is part of our community leadership. And then lastly, we help people invest in causes that matter to them. So my team is a relatively new one, and it has been made larger because we have brought together what is the community leadership team with the effective philanthropy team. And that's because, your community leadership officers are looking for ways to fund really important work that's going on in the community. And we only have control of a portion of the money that's available to grant each year. So they work very closely with our effective philanthropy officers who have access to hundreds of donors who come alongside us in many cases to fund important projects and programs. On the flip side, we have hundreds of donors who are looking for projects and things that are making Indianapolis better. And our effective philanthropy officers are conduits to those people so that we can help them make their giving more effective. So, like many of you, we've been following this growing bank of data that tells a disappointing story, that there is a growing gap between the affluent and the poor in America and central Indiana. The chances of making it out of poverty are slim. In fact, Indianapolis is number 46 out of the top 50 US cities in terms of economic mobility. That means if you are born poor here, you're likely to remain poor here. There's very little chance that you will move from the bottom 5% to the top 5%. We also know that the chances of doing better than your parents are slim and decreasing. And we know that a person's race and place have profound impacts on whether or not they'll have access to opportunity. We think that's unconscionable and we want better for our community. So last year, we unveiled a new mission, and that is we want to mobilize people, ideas, and investments to make this a community where all individuals have equitable opportunity to reach their full potential, no matter place, race, or identity. And while that new mission has been embraced by CICF, the Indianapolis Foundation, and Hamilton County Community Foundation, as well as Women's Fund, we know that the way we execute that mission is going to look a little different across Marion and Hamilton County. In Marion County, we know that we need to help create neighborhoods and environments that empower people. We know we need to change unfair systems, and we need to dismantle systemic racism. And we see that work happening in 5 leadership areas. That is economic mobility, family stability, neighborhood empowerment and placemaking, criminal justice reform, and dismantling systemic racism. And now I'm going to pass it over to Drew Black to talk more about family stabilization and economic mobility.
This is Drew Black, Director of Community Leadership at CICF. To provide a bit of historical context here, over the past 10 years, CICF has had 3 community initiatives. Those have been College Readiness and Success, which was focused on post-secondary access, persistence, and degree attainment. Family Success, which is essentially working with our working families on essentially achieving a higher quality of life. And Inspiring Places, which has been around placemaking and turning Indianapolis into a top 10 city of choice. These 3, the concepts here are still prevalent, but have been expanded on due to real-time community issues and some of the research that Tamara just spoke to. How were these new 5 areas informed? One thing CICF did was we administered a multi-pronged planning process for more than 2 years, which incorporated the feedback of our community ambassadors, who were neighborhood liaisons from across the city that were able to share authentic and organic feedback on what their neighborhoods needed and desired. All of that data was turned into a field report in late 2017 that we used to help put many of the pieces of this plan together. Additionally, much of this is data-driven. CICF hired consultants to assist in ensuring that we had accurate source baseline data that we will measure progress against. So now I'll speak to family stabilization. This is the first of the 5 initiatives. Our belief statement here is that everyone should have equitable opportunities to obtain housing, transportation, and health services. The core components here are strategic objectives, include preserving or developing affordable housing near transit stops, addressing racial disparities and wraparound services related to homelessness, developing protected pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure and pedestrian pathways that connect services, employment, and recreation, specifically in our neighborhoods that lack transportation options, creating a personal mobility network that will coordinate various modes of transportation across the city, with an emphasis on serving residents that do not have access to ready access to high quality transportation options, and assessing and addressing barriers of healthier maternal and birth outcomes among communities of color. So essentially, infant mortality and maternal health are going to be focus areas for us. The next category is economic mobility. Our belief statement is that all people can rise out of poverty by acquiring skills that lead to living wage jobs, and if they're not, that they are not held back by inequitable policies. Here we'll focus internally a bit to look at the levers that we have access to make a difference in expediting positive educational and economic outcomes for our residents. These include aligning our scholarships to support individuals that are seeking degrees, certifications, and other credentials that lead to meaningful career opportunities. In the past, CISCF has really focused on the acquisition of 2- and 4-year degrees. We will broaden our stance here to be more inclusive of our adult learning population, trade certifications, and other options that lead to high-quality post-secondary credentials that will enhance quality of life. A second piece of this is raising awareness and addressing racial disparities in educational outcomes, essentially focusing on the achievement gap that exists between our children of color in our public schools, and engaging opportunity youth between the ages of 16 to 24 in programs that promote education or career pathways. Currently, Indianapolis has more than 30,000 youth that are disconnected from both school or work. That number grows every year with high school graduation. We are looking at this as a core focus area in economic mobility. And then finally, championing policies that support economic justice. CICF has not traditionally been in the public policy landscape. We are looking at options to expand our influence and focus in this area.
Hi, Clayton Defer here. I'm presenting these next 2 slides on behalf of my colleague, Alicia Collins, Director of Community Leadership, who oversees the criminal justice reform and neighborhood empowerment and placemaking initiatives. So within criminal justice reform, our belief statement is that residents have a right to live in safe communities, and we need to commit to better outcomes for people interacting with the criminal justice system. A few of the key strategies and goals we're looking at within this initiative are reducing suspension and expulsion rates in Marion County schools, advocating for bail access and bail reform, scaling mental health and substance use diversion options, coordinating services for reentry and violence reduction, as well as creating a safety index to assess attitudes and perceptions, as well as neighborhood identity and neighborhood leadership. Next, in neighborhood empowerment and placemaking, our belief statement is that we believe communities are most successful and thriving when investments are resident-driven and when neighborhoods have access to culturally relevant art, nature, and beauty every day. Specific priorities within this initiative include supporting community-based assets and providing resources to neighborhood ambassadors. You may have heard of the CICF Ambassador Program that we're carrying on moving forward that Drew mentioned earlier. That falls within this initiative, as well as engaging in reciprocal relationships with residents that influence place-based transformations, expanding art and cultural experiences and programming in disinvested and underappreciated neighborhoods. And finally, working alongside the White Room Master Plan to ensure that that process is developed and built out in an equitable and inclusive manner.
Dismantling systemic racism. Our vision is that our foundation is committed to becoming a fully inclusive, anti-racist, and multicultural organization moving forward. And I'm speaking for our Vice President of Opportunity, Equity, and Inclusion, who is Pamela Ross. But what she would tell you is that we believe this work has to happen internally before we can start helping people externally. As a 100-year organization, we know that we no doubt have processes and policies and ways of moving that are not completely equitable. So over the next 5 years, she'll be working with us, doing things like developing inclusive and comprehensive hiring policies, educating our staff and board and community members about systematic racism, activism, and other anti-racist trainings, and taking other steps to make sure that we are walking the walk as well as talking the talk when it comes to equity.
So, what does this mean in terms of grant making? So you've probably heard that we control about $88 million worth of resources. That includes donor advised funds, other funds. Most of what you have interaction with us about is the Indianapolis Foundation's grant making. So that is just under $7 million available in grants. And you can see on the screen how that divides out. So 1.2 million of that is for the library fund, which supports public libraries, school libraries, and university libraries in Indianapolis. And then the other portion of that is divided between community leadership initiatives and open process response grants, about half and half. So we're going to talk a little bit later on about what the community leadership initiatives mean. You've just heard what they are, the 5 pillars that we just spoke of. And then open process responsive grant making consists of unrestricted grants, which are typically the responsive grants that you apply for through our portal, and then field of interest fund grants, which are, as they sound, grants that support a very specific field of interest. So it could be a grant that supports organizations that work with seniors, or it could be a grant that supports classical music or opera or something very specific that the donor has asked that money go towards.
I'd like to point out that we were very intentional about keeping a good balance between our proactive grant making, which is at community leadership initiatives, and our open process responsive grants. We know that there are fewer and fewer places that not-for-profits can go to simply get funding for a good idea. And we want to make sure that those avenues still exist. So the community leadership initiatives represent those 5 things that we just spoke to you about, but we have kept the money for that, though it is a very ambitious plan, about equal to what we have available for the open process responsive grants.
So the life cycle of a grant, what happens when you apply? So you submit through our portal, and your application is accepted by the submission deadline. Which, as we'll talk about here in just a minute, we just have a new open portal. We just opened it on Wednesday, May 1st, and it will be open this time until June 15th. And we'll talk again more about those timelines in just a few moments. Once your application is received, it will be reviewed. So it will be assigned to a staff member who will do due diligence, which is just to say that we'll be looking at your financials, what you've presented to us, and decide if there's alignment with a fund, or if we feel like it doesn't align and we need to communicate a decline. In the past, we have not always been timely about letting you know if your application was going to be declined, and so we are making a commitment to let you know sooner and not to let things drag out if we don't feel like there is proper alignment. Once we decide which grants we want to push forward, we make a preliminary recommendation to the grant making board, which reviews and then makes funding decisions. Once that decision has been made, we will communicate that to you. And then once you have been awarded your grant, typically we ask for a grant report about 1 year from when you get your funding, and that will not change. So just to give you a sense of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, of the limitations that we find that we have, we thought we would just share with you what our October 2018 application cycle looked like. So these were the applications that were received during the month of October that were then either declined or awarded just this last March. So in October, we received 123 requests, totaling $5.7 million. What we're actually able to award was about $800,000. The average request was about $48,000, and the average award was about $23,000. What this all boils down to is that for every dollar requested, we had about 14 cents to award. And we show you this just to give you a sense, again, of the reality in which we find ourselves in terms of resources.
So many of you might be wondering, what now does this mean for myself and my organization? I'm going to walk through a bit about how we're changing our timelines and then talk through specific types of grants to recap. So as we look at past timelines, prior to 2019, CICF took in applications in an open round twice a year, once in March and once in October. And then the Indianapolis Foundation and Hamilton County Community Foundation awarded grants 4 times per year, corresponding with the quarterly board meetings. The reality of this is it led to a long, drawn-out process because an application could come in and then be awarded in any of the next 1 or 2 or potentially 3 board meetings. If an application came in October and it couldn't go in the March round, so it got held to the May round, but that's a 7-month window. And say your organization was the last one pulled off the slating table in May because of budget considerations, that could be a 7-month wait time to get a decline. We understand that that is not acceptable, and those are timelines that are historic in nature. And so we have revamped our timelines for this year as a pivot towards a new timeline process starting next year. So as we look at our timeline this year in 2019, we're having 2 fixed grant application rounds, the first of which already took place, that October application round to March grant round that we spoke of earlier. The remaining grant round is the application that is open right now, as Diane referenced. Those applications are open May 1 through June 15th, and those applications will be decided on by our September board meeting. As you see, the 2 grant rounds, or this May to September grant round, is about a 4-month turnaround, which is what we're committing to moving forward. Starting at the end of the year, looking at 2020, we'll have 3 fixed grant rounds. The first being an application round in November that goes towards grant decisions in March. The second being an application round in January with decisions going towards May. The third being a May application round going towards grant decisions in September. So these will be 3 fixed grant rounds that will take less than 4 months from the deadline to the board meeting. And this is specific only to the Indianapolis Foundation and Hamilton County Community Foundation. But since those are the 2 that we have the most direct control of, we want to make sure that those timelines are as responsive as they can be to ensure that organizations that are not able to receive funding due to the highly competitive nature have a quick response on that and are able to carry forward accordingly. And so that organizations that do receive grants are able to access those funds and build out their program sooner rather than later. One question that we've gotten in prior sessions is around any updates to the application or reporting. There have been no updates made for the 2019 grant season. We are anticipating that we'll make some updates for the 2020 grant season, and so that'll be the November application will be the first time where new changes will come, and most of those changes will just be a sharpening of the way that we frame questions and look at evaluation and outcomes, et cetera. And so there will be changes to the reporting that will come on the back end, will be tethered to those new applications. But all in all, it will only be to give organizations a better understanding of what we're looking for. So lastly, I want to recap on a couple of things that we've hit on throughout the course of our presentation today around different types of grants. Most of our conversation is focused on our community leadership initiatives and then the Indianapolis Foundation's grant making. Here at CICF, we look at grants in 3 categories: community leadership grants, competitive grants, and donor advised fund grants. Community leadership grants are proactive grants where we partner with an organization on a specific project or program that is in line with our community leadership initiatives around moving the needle on a specific metric or outcome that we're looking for. Like I said, those are proactive where we engage with an organization about those. There's no open application process towards that. However, if your organization feels like you meet one of or are working on one of the specific things that we highlighted in our leadership initiative presentation earlier, by all means reach out to one of our staffers to have a further discussion on that to see how much alignment there might be. As it relates to competitive grants, this is where we view community funds, our major funds. So this is where Indianapolis Foundation, Hamilton County Community Foundation Women's Fund, Senior Fund, GLIC, Simon, etc. These are responsive grants. They still are responsive grants. As Drew mentioned, we've had community leadership initiatives for 14 years now here at CICF, and we've always had responsive grants in the midst of having those, and so there's no drastic change to that. Obviously, you saw from an Indianapolis Foundation lens just how competitive those responsive grants are, and so we look at the pool that we have. By no means are organizations beholden to our leadership initiatives. However, applications that are adjacent to those areas or are working in that space but maybe on different metrics will do well in that responsive category. And in the same way, we're going to be looking at issues of equity and inclusion within organizations. How is the work that each organization doing in the community? Is it being done with the community as opposed to the community? Is there a feedback loop for the community to re-engage and better the program? Is there representation of clientele around board leadership, things like that? This is an area where we want to encourage organizations to move in the right direction long term. And obviously, with responsive grants, we always encourage you to connect with your community leadership officer as you go in to apply for a grant, just to get a feel for if there is a possibility for alignment with what you're proposing. Lastly, on donor advised fund grants, we get a lot of questions about these. The bit of clarity that I always give is that donor advised funds are not a bunch of little private foundations crawling around within CICF looking for competitive grant applications. At the end of the day, a donor advised fund is a vehicle by which an individual or a family or a company can do its giving. Any gift that you would get from a donor advised fund would go into your individual giving line item in your revenue budget, or into your corporate giving revenue line in your budget. These are proactive gifts by the donors. They're personal gifts oftentimes. Donor advised funds are people just like we are, and just like all of your individual and corporate donors are. And so there's no way to directly solicit to donor advised fund holders. But what we always say is that, our community leadership team maintains strong relationships with our effective philanthropy officers. And whenever donor advisors have specific questions on organizations or areas within the field, they come to us for that information. And so your relationship to your community leadership officer is an indirect relationship to all of our donor advised funds. And so we're able to educate and bring our donor advisors up to speed to the best ability of the information that we have, that we receive from you and our community partners.
So, what are we looking for when we look at a grant request? So first of all, I want to start off by saying that all of this information on this slide is available in the Grant Seekers Guidebook, which is on our website. So you can access this information there. Essentially, we're looking for proven success, strong leadership, collaboration, cultural competency, and sustainability. And this is across the board, whether it's community leadership or responsive grant making, or a donor advised fund. These are the types of criteria that we are looking for. And similarly, what will we not support? Again, this information is all in the Grant Seekers Guidebook. We will not support organizations that are not 501c3s. We will not support individuals, organizations that discriminate based on race, ethnicity, age, gender, or sexual orientation, political campaigns or direct lobbying efforts, post-event or debt retirement, or projects that promote a particular religion. What we are looking for is creative and innovative solutions. We know that we are trying to help solve and move the needle on some difficult and sometimes long-standing community-wide and systemic issues. And we are looking for your knowledge, your creativity, your innovative ideas to help move the needle on some of these issues. So we want your great ideas. We continue to want your great ideas. So please speak to your community leadership officer, give us a call, and we welcome your applications.
So is there anyone who is watching via Zoom who has any questions for us this afternoon? So if none, then I'd like to thank you once again for joining us this afternoon. And a reminder that our current grant application process is open and will be until June 15th. If you have any questions and need technical support, please contact Haley Logan. If you have questions about your particular application or your organization, please contact your community leadership officer. This presentation will be available on our website in the space for grant seekers and not-for-profits later next week. Thank you so much and have a great weekend.